So we're nearly wrapping up 2023, and hopefully it's been a good year of shooting film for you. I know for me personally, I think I've come to settle on my top 5 favorite film stocks, and if you're new to shooting film photography, I think you should definitely try out these. So let's go. The Kodak Portra series. So this first one might seem incredibly obvious. This is probably the most popular film stock among film photographers nowadays, and for a good reason. The Portrait 160, 400, 800 film series have excellent qualities. So incredibly fine grain, beautiful colors, wide dynamic range, and it's incredibly good at getting accurate skin tones. So if you're a wedding or portrait photographer, you're going to get really pleasing images of people. But also if you're shooting landscape or street, you can also get incredible colors. And if you're editing your photos in post, because of its wide dynamic range, you can overexpose and still bring back a lot of your highlights and information back into the scene. Because of how flexible Portrait can be and the fact that it can be used in different use cases, there's a reason why this is one of the most sought after color negative film stocks. And with this popularity, it comes at a premium price. So this is going to take a hit on your wallet. Portra 35mm can be found from anywhere from $16 to $18. It gets cheaper the higher ISO that you go, but it's not cheap at all. And this goes for the medium format version as well. If you can find it anywhere, I would recommend not just buying like a 5-pack, maybe buy one roll if you haven't shot Portrait before to get an idea if you like it or not. Personally, I tend to shoot other film stocks instead of Portrait if I'm not doing anything that's paid work or a serious project. If I'm just walking around taking photos of friends, or if I just want to experiment with film, I'm not going to pay $18 for one roll of 35mm. Let's go to the second film stock, Cinestill 800T. Now this is another incredibly popular color negative film stock from a company called Cinestill. This might be everyone's go-to film stock when shooting in low light scenarios or when shooting under tungsten lighting. So Cinestill 800T, the T standing for tungsten, is actually repackaged Kodak Vision 3 500T. However, this does not mean that you're going to get the same image from Kodak cinema film. So what Cinestill did is that they removed a layer called remjet from the original cinema film stock. And what remjet does is that it protects light refracting off of the film backing into the negative, which causes light sources within your negative to diffuse and glow. But this is actually a desirable effect and can add some really cool images once you're actually shooting without the remjet layer. While the original Kodak Vision 3 500T calls for shooting at 500 ISO, Cinestill says that you can actually shoot this up to 800 ISO. However, I would be careful and probably tend to shoot at 500 for the cleanest image. Once you start getting to 800, you can get some really grainy images. You still can if you need that extra step of sensitivity, but I would personally shoot at the lower limit. Cinestill Black and White XXX. This is my favorite black and white film stock to shoot with, and possibly my most favorite film stock to shoot with in general. Black and White XXX is derived from Kodak's famous XXX 5222 film stock. And there's probably a ton of films that you've seen or heard of that have been shot on XXX, such as The Lighthouse, Raging Bull, Schindler's List, and Manhattan. So by the nature and history of this film, the image that you can get on this film stock can look cinematic. The image that this film produces is high contrast, it's got rich deep blacks, it's got a wide dynamic range, and fine grain. For people that don't like doing any post-processing on their film scans, this might be the film for you. This is a variable ISO film stock, so that means in daylight settings you shoot this at 250 ISO, and under tungsten lighting you shoot at 200. And it can be pushed all the way up to 1600 ISO with the appropriate development time. Now if you haven't tried most of the film stocks that I'm talking about in this video, this is the one that I suggest everyone to try next. Lomography Color 92. So this is a very new 35mm film stock that just came out this year from the experimental photographic company Lomography. Now the story of this film is that it's supposed to evoke a 90s vintage era look, so you're going to have some pretty muted colors and a pretty big grain structure. Now, I was fortunate enough to get a roll of Lomography Color 92 when I was traveling to Mexico City. And I heard from others that this film was best shot overexposed by one stop. So it's rated at 400 ISO, but I would shoot it at 200. And I'm glad I got that advice because it's definitely pretty dark. Now, the resulting images reminded me of 80s and 90s era sci-fi films. It's definitely got a vintage look to it. It looks like it's been through a lot. It's got really cool color tones to it and really big grain. So it's still like a very interesting image, but don't expect anything like Portra when you're shooting with this. And finally, Kodak Ektar 100. Now this is another amazing color negative film stock from Kodak that is best used in daylight balanced lighting. The prime strength of this film is shooting nature and landscapes. It's rated at 100 ISO, so it's meant for occasions with a lot of light, such as sunny and bright days. The film naturally boosts colors such as red and orange, so it's great when shooting foliage or desert scenes. I'd avoid shooting portraits with this film stock because it tends to oversaturate skin tones, so you're going to get people with really red, sunburnt looking skin. But if you're just throwing this film roll in while you're just casually shooting around, I think it's completely fine. I've taken this film with me to Maine during the fall foliage season, and the colors you can get when shooting in the right conditions is amazing. Ektar is popular but not as highly sought after in the general public as much as Portra. So this could be a good film to try out when you're planning to be outdoors. I think this is actually my #1 film if I had to shoot landscapes. Alright, so those were my top 5, but there's so many film stocks to try, I can't help but mention 3 other, maybe honorable mention films in this list. The first one I have to mention is Fuji Natura 1600. Now this film is incredibly hard to come by because Fuji ceased production of this film in 2017. But it's famous because it's the highest rated color negative film stock at 1600 ISO. And I've taken this film with me to San Francisco Chinatown with no extra lighting, without pushing anything in development, and I shot everything rated at 1600 ISO, and the shots I got were surprisingly usable even in dark scenes. Like, there were a couple shots that I wouldn't have been able to get with Cinestill 800T, so if you can find this on eBay, I would suggest trying out one roll. Another popular color negative film stock I'm gonna suggest here is Lomography Color 400 or 800. Now, these two film stocks are really great substitutions when Portra 400 and 800 were either out of stock or it was just too expensive to use at the time. And surprisingly, this Lomography film produced really pleasing color negative shots, and so a ton of people ended up finding out that these were great substitutions. And now Lomography 400 800, ironically, are also really hard to find, and they're also pricey too. And I don't think Lomography is producing them at the rate when they were first released, so this is kind of the reason why I put in the honorable mention section instead of throwing in the list. But if you can see it, I would definitely try one roll. I wouldn't try buying like a bulk of these because they're still pretty expensive. My last honorable mention is Kodak Gold. Now this one's pretty funny to me because for me personally, I shot on Kodak Gold when I was doing casual street photography when I didn't want to pay for Kodak Portra, because Kodak Gold has a brilliant warm color tone to it. And a lot of people are buying Portra, shooting it, and then processing the image with a really warm image that had similar color temperatures to Kodak Gold. So naturally, Kodak Gold became incredibly popular. Now Kodak Gold is rated at 200 ISO and has pretty big grain structure. So because of that, it has a very vintage aesthetic while still having that color palette that people really liked from editing their portrait images. And therefore, Kodak Gold raised in price. I recently went into a shop and saw the price of Kodak Gold on 35mm was near the same price as Kodak Portra, which didn't really make that much sense to me, but I guess because of its rising popularity, the prices went up. With the resurgence of Kodak Gold, Kodak actually produced a medium format version of this film stock, which is pretty surprising, but it must be in such high demand that Kodak actually went ahead with it. Of course, all the film stocks that I listed in this video are just my personal favorites in the moment, and the beauty of film photography is that you're allowed to experiment and try different rolls depending on the scenario or the aesthetic that you want. And if you're new to film photography, I would highly recommend trying out at least one roll of the listed favorites that I have in this video instead of buying like a 5-pack of Portra and trying to experiment a little bit. And in the comments, write down what your favorite roll of film is, because I myself need to experiment more. I feel like I have a tendency to pick my favorites instead of trying to, you know, pick a new one that I haven't shot with. So let me know what you think, and thanks for watching.